go live an hour earlier than planned, because I have an assignment that I have to do before the end of my spring semester, which is coming up here in actually, 24 hours. Tomorrow at around noon, I'll be done, which will be pretty fantastic. It's something I'm excited for. I will say, unfortunately, that I have another class that I'm taking this summer, and that starts about a week and a half from today. But it will be nice to have a week break and to have, another class done, get closer to my bachelor's degree. But that's not why we're here. I'm here to go live with you for about an hour 15. Maybe we can push it a little bit more than that, to talk about SEC win totals, Michigan or Penn State, for who has the best chance of those two to usurp Ohio State and Oregon, who many assume, and I would say correctly assume, are the two best programs in the Big Ten moving forward. Although I know USC and even some Nebraska people would like to be in that conversation, and that will be included for another live show. I also want to talk about Miami and Indiana. These are two programs that lose a good amount, but are continually upgrading their roster through recruiting or through the portal, that I think have made staff upgrades. Either Indiana, replacing Allen and bringing Cignetti was major, and then Cristobal continues to make his staff better. And I also want to talk about Steve Sarkisian in Texas for a few minutes, because I have an opinion about Sarkisian that I formulated a few months ago and that I've had in my mind for a little bit, and I just want to talk about it. I want to discuss it, because I think that Sarkisian is someone who, in a certain sense, might be overvalued, but he also has some attributes that I think are criminally undervalued as well. Before we begin, please make sure to like the video to give us a boost into the algorithm and show us that you enjoy what you're watching. If you do, at least like the video. If not, you can always comment down below why you disagree or why you don't like it. Feedback's an important part of college football with Sam. Hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live on Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to join our Discord server via the link in the video description. That way you can interact with me, interact with other college football fans, and also you will get the opportunity and privilege to ask me any college football questions, and I will be obligated to turn it into a video. Just go to the YouTube mailbox channel in the Discord, ask me a question, I'll add it to my log, and eventually it will be featured as a video. That's it, actually. If you want to go any further than what I asked you to do, and those things are all free, doesn't sign you up for anything, you can purchase merchandise on my merchandise store via the link in the description, or what you can do is visit my Patreon page and sign up as a paid member. So let's begin, and I want to talk about SEC win totals first. That's what we're going to do here today on College Football with Sam, giving picks for the 2025 SEC win totals. Vegas has win totals out for all 16 SEC teams. Yes, the old 14 in Oklahoma and Texas, who I feel like have acclimated well to the Southeastern Conference. Which teams will win more or fewer games than the expectations, whether explicitly or implicitly, that Vegas has set? That's a question I'm going to try and answer in this segment, and I want you to comment down below what you think of these win totals. Which do you think are win totals that are undervaluing the team they're assigned to, overvaluing the team they're assigned to? Who's your favorite pick to go over their win total and your favorite pick to go under? Let me know in the comments section. And also, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Like the video to give us a boost into the algorithm. And check out the video description to hit the notification bell on my college football podcast, which is just a playlist for all of my content if you want to follow it more closely. And there's also a link to a Discord server, which is free to join. Everything I asked you before then is free. Doesn't sign you up for anything. It's a great way to get more amazing college football content. And if you want to donate to the channel or support us monthly, sign up for my Patreon page membership or purchase merchandise via my merchandise store. Link to those are in the description. But I want to bring up these SEC win totals here, go through them, and give some of my picks. So let me slide over to the left right-hand side of your screen and bring out these win totals. So tied for first, we have Texas, we have Georgia, we have Alabama at 9.5 wins. We have tied for fourth Tennessee, LSU, and Ole Miss at 8.5 wins. At seventh, tied for seventh, we have 5 teams set at 7.5 wins. Florida, A&M, South Carolina, Auburn, and Missouri. And we have, weirdly, 12th and 13th place. Oklahoma at 6.5 wins is 12th. 13th is Arkansas, set at 5.5 wins. Those are very intriguing situations, and I think their unique win totals for the conference reflect that. And then tied at 14th, we have Kentucky and Vanderbilt at 4.5. Mississippi State's one of those other teams whose win total is so low that we're probably not going to talk about it, all the way down there at 3.5. The team that got just completely shanked and disemboweled live on air by Toledo, a MAC school. They didn't even look like an SEC team last year. If not for Purdue taking the spotlight as one of the worst Power 4, Power 5 teams in 21st century college football history, Mississippi State would have received such attention. That's how bad they were last season. What speaks to me, what strikes me here, is that compared to the Big Ten, and I did my Big Ten win totals yesterday live, so if you want to check out that episode, just go to my channel page, look at the live videos, you'll see Big Ten win totals, and the segment for that's already been cut. In fact, I'll link it on the top right corner of the screen. You'll see a little pop-up there. If you're interested in Big Ten win totals, just click that. Thank you. Anyway, the Big Ten was a little bit more unbalanced. You had the 3 teams at the top for win totals at 10.5. No one was at 9.5. And you didn't have as many teams with 7.5 win totals or greater. You actually had fewer Big Ten teams that are projected to win around 7 or 8 games. And what that tells me is that the SEC is viewed by Vegas, and I know this as well because the SEC and Big Ten are pretty similar in power ratings. SEC slightly similar, even if you avoid FPI, which is a little bit biased toward ESPN. Even if you avoid that, most power ratings say the SEC is a little bit stronger. And Vegas views the SEC also as stronger because they have more teams projected to win 7, 8 games relative to the Big Ten. And consequentially, because of that, and because they don't have Purdue, Maryland, Northwestern, UCLA, they don't have multiple teams who might be toward the bottom of the chili pot. The SEC maybe has 3 at the most, maybe 2, Vanderbilt by talent, Mississippi State all around. A lot of teams aren't viewed as surefire 10 or 11 win teams, like in the Big Ten. Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are viewed as you're winning 10 games or 11, in the case of Penn State, potentially 12. I don't think anyone is picking, myself included, any of these SEC teams to win 12 games. 11 wins may even be pushing it. And I'm someone who's pretty high on Texas, high on Georgia, not necessarily high on Alabama, but I can see why others are. The fact that their highest win total, the SEC's highest win total for any team is 9.5, speaks to how Vegas and many in college football, the whales and the sharps, I almost forgot my betting terms there, but I don't bet. The sharps totally view this conference as one that's up for cannibalization. So that's something that strikes me and that immediately jumps out to me when I look at these win totals. To go to my easier picks for overs and unders, I would say Texas and Texas A&M are my easiest picks to go over. Texas, they have Arch Manning coming in, who had some limited action last year. Ironically, a lot of it came against Mississippi State, but he played some against Georgia, a team that kicked Texas's butt physically, and I think that might be a game that's good for Arch Manning to get used to, nothing going right for him, facing that adversity and having that in his mind. Texas played him some against Texas A&M and in other games too, whether in backup duty or using him in obvious quarterback run situations. He has really good arm talent too, but that's not what I want to focus on. He's a part of the reason why I would say this is an easy over. But he's not the main reason. The main reason is the Texas defense, where they return Trey Moore, they return Colin Simmons, they bring back Ethan Burke, and then Michael Taft comes back, Malik Muhammad comes back. They return Anthony Hill Jr., who I think is one of the best defensive players in all of the country. And they moved Trey Moore to linebacker because they're that confident in their edge players. I think they have one of the best defenses in America, if not the number one defense for 2025. And that, when you are playing Georgia on the road, when you are playing Ohio State on the road, and when you are facing DJ Lagway on the road, is very helpful. It would be one thing if Texas had to face those schools, many of whom have a lot of offensive talent, or in the case of Georgia, it's just hard to win in Sanford. They haven't lost a game there since 2019, and Smart has already 2 wins over Sark, even though Sarkisian and Texas have only been in the SEC for a year. Having a defense and being able to game control your opponents is very helpful. And I think because of their defense and the combination of their defense with how Kyle Flood recruits on the offensive line and with how talented Arch Manning is, and the fact that Texas just continues to build their roster in terms of recruiting talent, their strength and conditioning coach won the Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year award, and they have had 2 seasons in a row putting double-digit players into the NFL. You may see that as a negative for why they won't be very good this year relative to where they were last year and in 2023, but they improved last year compared to 2023 when a lot of teams did not. 2024 was a down year in football, and Texas was one of those teams who improved compared to what they were the prior year, despite losing so much and despite Quinn Ewers being injured for much of the year and then suffering injuries on the offensive line and at other positions as well. So I love the Texas over here. I think Texas is at least beating one of Ohio State, Georgia, and Florida, and I can easily see them beating 2. I can even see them beating all 3 and going 12-0. I'm not going to predict it to happen, but I can see it. That's how strongly I believe in Texas and their ceiling, and I don't think their floor is that low. So Texas, I think they're going to go 10-2 most likely, or 11-1 is certainly more likely than 9-3. So that's an easy pick for me for the over. A&M, they're top 10 in returning production. Top 10 in returning production with Marcel Reed coming back. They have a wonderful offensive line. It could be a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line. It's one that I really, really like when looking at the SEC, the defensive lines they'll play, their schedule lines up. They get Notre Dame on the road, yes, but it's 3 games in, and Notre Dame's returning fewer than 60% of their 2024 production. Meanwhile, A&M is, well, returning in the 70s right there. That O-line, I'm telling you, Armaj Reed-Adams, Chase Basantis, and then Trezon III and Demetrius Crownover at tackle. It's a mean O-line with Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels behind them. And then on defense, they bring back Albert Regis. They return Tareen York and Scooby Williams. And I like Mike Elko. And Elko is actually going to be more involved with the defense this year. I think that's a good thing for Texas A&M. And the fact that the win total is set at 7.5, look at their schedule. Which teams are guaranteed to beat them? I'd say the only one is Texas on the road. That's the only guaranteed L. So you then look at the guaranteed wins: Samford, UTSA, Utah State, probably Mississippi State at home, maybe Arkansas on the road, depending where Pittman's at. Arkansas may have quit by then. He may have been fired by then. Anywhere from 4 to 5 guaranteed wins. And that leaves you anywhere from 6 to 7 wins where let's just call it what it is. Let's just say 50-50. So that would be, if you have 5 guaranteed wins, let's say Pittman gets fired, well, that would be 8-4. Lost to Texas, split your 50-50 games, win the guaranteed ones. You get to 7.5 with those 4 guaranteed wins and the L, and then you split the difference there. So I believe, looking at Florida at home, Notre Dame on the road, LSU on the road, South Carolina at home, Missouri on the road, all of those teams, and those are the more 50-50 games, they lose more than A&M does. And I don't think any any of those schools except for potentially Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman have a better coach than Mike Elko right now. And none of those schools outside of, again, maybe Notre Dame and definitely Texas have more talent than A&M. So A&M having a better coach than most people on their schedule, having more returning production than most teams on their schedule, and more raw talent, and staffs typically have their biggest impact in their second year, new coaching staffs. I love A&M this year, so that's an over for me. Arkansas, this is going to be short, this is going to be sweet. The fact that Josh Pate on one of his live shows, when asked about Arkansas, just kind of took a big sigh and said, I don't know, and then took another pause. And he's an SEC guy in particular. He knows college football very well, but he's focused on the SEC. That's his bread and butter. That's where he grew up. That's where he started out. That tells me everything I need to know. That, along with the fact that they're bringing in almost 40 transfers, and they lost really fantastic players, especially on the offensive line, which is Pittman's specialty, like Patrick Kutas or Joshua Braun. Those were great guards from Arkansas who just got up and left. Taylon Green stayed, but he was one of the few stars that did stay. And a lot of those other players just, well, they got up and left. They did. And they're relying on a lot of transfers, a veteran QB, yes, and Bobby Petrino returns to be offensive coordinator. But their schedule's tough. They play Notre Dame non-conference, and they get a lot of other tough games in which they're going to be underdogs. So I think it's an easy under 5.5 there. Some tougher picks, but ones I'm more confident on are Georgia, over, Oklahoma, over, Missouri, over, and then I like the under for LSU and Kentucky. Georgia, last season went 10-2 with perhaps the toughest schedule in college football history, or very close to it, regular season-wise especially. And they had, this is an insane stat. In fact, I'm going to look this up. A friend texted it to me. And while I look it up, I'm going to try my best to keep talking to you. Carson Beck was very up and down. Very up and down. So Carson Beck had multiple games where he threw 3 interceptions and Georgia won the game by double digits. And his text after that was, like, what the F is that? That was, and the F was a word that rhymes with duck. Like, verbatim, that's what he said after that. And then he said, and wait until you hear the teams. And I said Florida was one, and I was correct. And then he said Texas was the other. Against Texas and Florida, Beck threw 3 interceptions, and they won the game by double digits. It's insane. It's insane. And they physically kicked the rear of both of those schools. They injured DJ Lagway, and when you injure a QB that talented, that says more about your defense typically than the injured QB's strength and conditioning program of his team. And then the way they did Texas, and Texas would have won it all if they beat Ohio State. The Ohio State-Texas Cotton Bowl was the de facto national title game. That was insanely impressive. And they did it again in Atlanta. They did it again. Seriously. Again in the trenches. It's just Texas had a better game plan and Ewers was more healthy and they weren't as surprised by what Georgia was doing. But the fact that Georgia had the depth last year, and they do again this year, to pull out 5 defensive linemen and mess with any offensive line they have, the fact that they can do more than that on defense, they can run almost whatever they want on defense. They're a well-prepared team. Smart punched above his weight class. He had one of his worst teams of his tenure, and they still won 11 games, won the SEC, almost beat Alabama on the road. Just crazy stuff. And then what if the middle 2 minutes of the game against Notre Dame went the other way, and Georgia doesn't fumble it, and they don't allow a kickoff return for a touchdown? They may have beaten Notre Dame. They were physically winning against Notre Dame too. Notre Dame just won on special teams and won the turnover battle. And with a backup QB, well, that's a death sentence, especially when winning on special teams means you get a whole touchdown out of it. So I think even with a tough schedule, where Georgia, they play Tennessee on the road, yes, but they get Ole Miss at home, and Ole Miss loses everyone. They get Alabama at home. They get Texas at home. I think it's an easier schedule than what they had last year. and a lot went wrong for them. So Georgia regressing to the mean doesn't mean they get worse. It actually means they get better. So I love Georgia there. For Oklahoma and Missouri, not as confident for the over as Georgia, but Missouri at 7.5 seems low when they start the year off, I believe, with 6 or 7 straight home games. Is that correct? Yes, it's 6 straight home games, and they get a bye before the Alabama game. And their road games in conference are Auburn, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Just seems pretty low to me. And I like Drinkwitz as a coach, and I think they did well in the portal. Oklahoma, they are a lethal unit on defense, and I think because of their defense and because of John Mateer, and because of the fact that I think they're better roster-wise than Missouri and LSU, or at least they should be. Doesn't mean I'm going to have them power-ranked higher, or that they will be power-rated higher by objective measurements at the end of the year. But in theory, they should have a better roster than Missouri. It should be better than LSU, definitely better than Ole Miss, should be better than Tennessee, South Carolina, Auburn. If they just punch above their weight class a few times and then perform well at home, they should get to 7 wins pretty handily. And that's not even including the game against Michigan, where I look at the Michigan game, and I think at the end of the year, Michigan will be significantly better than Oklahoma. But that doesn't mean they'll be significantly better in week 2. Oklahoma has a massive experience edge over Michigan in week 2. If they lose to Michigan, I still think they'll get to 7 wins. If they beat Michigan, I think they're getting to 8. And they're shooting over their win total by more than a game. So I love Oklahoma over. And then LSU and Kentucky, I'm not buying LSU this year. I think that losing as much as they did in the O-line with Nussmeier, who's more of a pro-style statue QB, is a death sentence. And then the fact they start off against Clemson in week 1, if they lose that game, and I think they will because Clemson's just amazing this year, that will once again put a negative tone on the year. And they have to play Alabama on the road. They have to play Oklahoma on the road. They have to play Florida at home and play at Ole Miss. And Ole Miss and LSU, whoever's the home team in that rivalry, typically doesn't lose. Vanderbilt on the road won't be easy. A&M and South Carolina at home won't be easy. I just think there's at least 4 losses there, and that means they go under. I'd stay away from Alabama, from Tennessee, Ole Miss, from Florida, South Carolina, Auburn, Vanderbilt, and Mississippi State. If I'm wrong on any of these picks, it will be on ones that I'm staying away from. Alabama and Florida have enough coming back, enough seniority, and enough talent, whether Florida, it's mainly almost exclusively at QB and O-line, and then Alabama, it's everywhere, to where it might be a no-brainer to pick them to go over, especially for Alabama, because when you look at teams who have a top 5 roster in terms of recruiting rankings, and you assemble those teams, the only one who returns more than 55% of their production is Alabama. And they're not in the high 50s. They're in the 60s. And a lot went wrong for them last year. And they upgraded an offensive coordinator, replacing Sheridan, who's still on the team. And I don't think he was the problem last year. And it's not an insult to Sheridan to say he was replaced. He's good. I just think that Grubb's elite. There's a difference there. It might be a no-brainer for Alabama to go over. And as for Florida, if Georgia takes a step back, if Texas takes a step back, if Miami takes a step back and Ole Miss does, and Florida State just doesn't recover well enough to challenge Florida because that wasn't a game last year, Florida could win 9 games. Heck, they could win 10, depending on how the schedule pans out, for sure. I'm not going to go that far at all, but I think 7-5, 8-4 is their most likely record, and I'm not the highest person on Florida. So if I'm wrong and some of those people who are very high on Florida are correct, this team's going 8-4 or better, and that will be over their win total of 7.5. So thank you so much for watching and checking out these SEC win totals. I had a lot of fun making this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, hit the bell, and comment your thoughts on my analysis of these win totals and my picks, and just your thoughts on the win totals overall. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic day. Now let's continue. Indeed, let's continue. And talk about Miami, and what Miami's transfer portal additions tell us. If any of you do have super chats that you do want to send, if any of you have those and you want me to answer any of your questions, I'm very short on time today, so I won't be answering any non-super chat questions. But if you do have them and want them to be answered today, I will do my best to get to them. However, I would advise, if you're a regular viewer of the show, wait until Wednesday or wait until a later date to ask a question with a super chat if you want an in-depth answer. If you want to ask it now, that's fine, but overall, I'm pretty short on time in this show. Just wanted to let you know. And if you're not watching this live, just completely ignore it. But I like answering questions, viewer questions, live if they have something really interesting. And then, of course, because this helps pay for my tuition, and this is ultimately my dream job, if they're willing to pay me to ask a question, well, who am I to say no? So let's talk about Miami. There's a lot of thought to go into Miami entering 2025. There are two schools of thought when assessing the Miami Hurricanes. And I typically see this in online circles. And the schools of thought usually are, well, they're just so talented that at some point they have to break through and they have to get back to what they were, or in part of what they were in the early 2000s and 90s and 80s when they were a dynasty and an NFL factory. And the other school of thought is they just haven't done this in a while, and they're never going to do that, as in be elite, again. It seems to be the main camps in relationship to Miami. And the one camp, the U camp, the one talking about Miami as if every year they're going to be back, well, a lot of that's Miami fans. And the other camp are a lot of non-Miami fans. And here am I, not a Miami fan. I'm sitting here in the middle. And I look at this roster and I think to myself, well, they added a lot in the portal. I think they're clearly uncomfortable in some areas. But also, they added a fair amount in the portal last year and had a really good team. And they clearly know what they're doing on the offensive line. They're clearly comfortable at defensive end. They made, I think, a fantastic hire at defensive coordinator this preseason in Corey Heatherman. And for a team that finished 10-3, 6-2, and was oh so close to getting to the college football playoff, I want to talk about this team and honestly assess whether I think they could be better than they were last year or whether they will be worse. I think there's an outcome for either of those options that's realistic. Miami could be better than they were last year. I don't think they'll be better on offense, but the defense, if it really comes together and Beck is healthy and works out at quarterback, and the run game is a Miami Mario Cristobal style run game, and it was at times last year, then this unit can be a game controlling tank, and they can reach the playoffs, and they can win the ACC, and they can even, when it's supposed to be Clemson's year, they can usurp Clemson. There's also the fact that if Beck, well, isn't healthy and the defense needs more than a year to at least become a top 25-esque unit, and the wide receiver core, after losing as much as it did, just doesn't pan out, well, this team can go under their preseason win total of 8.5, and the year would be considered a failure. Before we dive deep into Miami, and I give you my analysis of this team, and more specifically what their spring portal additions tell us for what their quality of team is for 2025, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell, comment your record prediction for Miami, for the Hurricanes this year, and tell me whether you think they'll make the college football playoff and how you would peg their odds of winning the national championship. Thank you so much, and let's dive into it. Let's get to it. So when I look at Miami, this team finished 10-3, 6-2 in the ACC. They had a lot of good moments last year, but also a lot of ugly. A lot of close wins that shouldn't have been close wins with the talent they had versus the talent on the opposing sideline, with the coaching staff and head coach they had versus the head coaches and coaching staffs on the opposing sideline. I'm not the biggest Cristobal fan when it comes to game management especially, but he's a much better head coach than Brent Pry and Justin Wilcox. And the fact that they almost lost to Virginia Tech and Cal was a little bit damning, I'm not going to lie. So that was bad, but the way they opened up against Florida was impressive. The ceiling at times that they showed throughout the year on offense was very, very impressive. They had the best offense in America last year, and that's a big deal with Shannon Dawson entering his second year with Miami in 2024, now his third year. That's a hire that's panned out, an offensive coordinator hire that's panned out, and with Miami's resources, I expect him to stay there for quite some time. They figured out offense, Miami has, and with Alex Mirabal on the offensive line and with Cristobal being an elite recruiter, especially more of an offensive line guy than other head coaches, it's not exactly surprising in hindsight, but hindsight's 2020. Defensively is where they have to figure some things out, and this is where the players that return and the key portal additions, I think, paint the picture for this year. Because Heatherman, I think, is good. I think he's a young, upcoming name who can cement himself this year and the year after this season, 2026, if he improves Miami's defense. But he's also a coordinator change, and if the players don't change, if the development doesn't change, that can also cause issues. So let's look at what Miami brings back overall, but also especially on defense, and also look at their transfer additions. They return 57% of their 2024 production. They have the number 3 portal class in America entering 2025. When I look at Miami's roster, I'm not going to kid you when I say this. This is, straight face. I'm serious. If I laugh or smile, it's because I'm surprised. I think Clemson's the best team in the ACC, but I will tell you, I think Miami's is the most talented, I think, now from a high school standpoint, and adjusting that to, it's kind of hard to put it, but adjusting it to a lot of players that Clemson's brought in, a lot have panned out, but some also haven't. And Clemson hasn't used the portal a bunch. They also haven't lost a lot to the portal. But Miami's rapidly improving, and I don't feel like Clemson's doing that. I feel like Clemson's the best team in the ACC this year because they have a good staff, because Sweeney still is at least a good coach, although he's been disappointing, and they have the best QB in America, and they have the most returning production. But if you were to hold many of those things equal, the returning production in particular, I would say that Miami is more balanced and that Miami is more talented. Now, I don't think that'll translate this year to them likely being the best team or the team in the ACC that has the best odds to win it all, so at least it may not translate to them having the highest ceiling, but I think that their floor is higher than a lot of people think. And I think that returning your 2 tackles, Francis Mauigoa and Markel Bell, certainly help out with that. Georgia had issues on the offensive line last year. Part of that was their O-line as it was. Another part was their very tough schedule. And the tougher the schedule, especially with a position like the O-line where injuries are common, you can get messed up there. Miami, while having a tougher schedule than last year, hosting Florida, hosting Notre Dame, those will be 2 big games, and also they have to travel to SMU and host Louisville. I think those 4 are your top 25 teams that Miami will play. It's not a Georgia-level schedule. And Beck, working under Shannon Dawson, who I think is superior to Mike Bobo, and being able to rest and really have kind of a reset behind Mauigoa, who had a 71 PFF grade, played for almost 1,000 snaps last year, 914, and he had a 72.7 pass blocking grade and a 68.1 run blocking grade, which is good. It's respectable. And Bell had a 61 PFF grade, only 63.6 pass blocking grade with just under 600 snaps, 544 total snaps last year. I think it's a good tackle situation, a really good one, and I believe that Mauigoa could be the number 1 tackle in America this year. So that helps the offense. And I also will tell you that at running back, just very briefly, I think that Mark Fletcher Jr., Jordan Lyle, an incoming transfer from North Dakota State, Chamar Brown, those are all ACC-level running backs. Miami could have the deepest running back room in America this year. I don't think they have the best running back. I don't think they have the best running back room because the 1-2 punch matters more than the third stringer. And Penn State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Minnesota, there's other teams I could list who are better, like even Louisville and Georgia Tech probably, who are better than Miami there. But Miami's depth at running back is crazy good. And that with James Brockermeyer coming in at center, I think you give Beck a pretty favorable situation to command the offense. You look at the defense, and Miami actually had a good freshman corner last year. Despite all the struggles in their secondary, they had a bright spot. O.J. Frederick Jr., freshman last year, will be a sophomore this year. He had a 76.2 PFF grade, 30 tackles, tackle for loss, a pick, and 7 passes defended. And then on the defensive line, you have 2 DNs, 2 edge players, and Reuben Bain Jr. was this big guy, like 270 pounds, 79.8 PFF grade, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks to QB hurry. Didn't play as much as he did in 2023, didn't put the same numbers, but he's an All-American caliber player. And then Akeem Mesidor, 32 tackles, 9 TFLs, 5.5 sacks, and 2 QB hurries. He's a huge returning player, almost said addition. We'll get to David Blade Jr., who I think is the big addition on the defensive line. And then some transfer additions that I think really, have they make the finishing touches to the picture that will be Miami's 2025 season. Carson Beck, who 28 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, had a rushing touchdown, 3,485 passing yards. If he can be the average of his career, or he can be 2023 Carson Beck, this Miami offense will once again be top 10, with Josiah Trader ready to step up and CJ Daniels transferring in with 480 receiving yards from LSU. I mainly want to talk about the defensive additions, though. Defensive tackle David Blade Jr. had 2 QB hurries, 6.5 sacks, 10.5 TFLs, and a 73.5 PFF grade. Miami is thin at defensive tackle this year. They are thin there, but Justin Scott is someone who I think can step up. Ahmad Moten is good there, and adding in Blay at least gives them a player where they can bring in a third guy when the second or first guy gets tired, or if an injury happens, the starting defensive tackles won't totally drop off. That was a smart move. I love that they added Mohamed Toure from Rutgers, who when healthy is good. And then you look at their safeties, Zachariah Poyser, Jacoby Thomas, and then corner Xavier Lucas and Charles Brantley, who were added. Love their additions. I think this Miami secondary is going to be much better than it was last year. Brantley and Lucas had PFF grades in the high 70s. Lucas had a sack, 1.5 TFLs, a pick, and 2 passes defended as a true freshman at Wisconsin. Brantley had 3 picks, a pick 6, and 7 passes defended at Michigan State, and he will be the nickelback for this team, projected according to the Miami depth chart, with O.J. Frederick Jr. and Xavier Lucas being the 2 corners. When I look at this team, and when I did my research and graded the staff, it's one of the better staffs in the ACC, by the way, and including Notre Dame in that mix, so that makes it look even better. I love the talent they have. I love the picture this paints as well. There are questions, don't get me wrong. I think wide receiver, and I would think safety is a question too, because looking at Poyser, who's coming from the G5, and Jacoby Thomas, who wasn't graded all that well from Tennessee, the secondary is not going to be perfect. I don't think the defense will be perfect in year one after the mess that Lance Guidry left it in. And then the wide receiver room loses a ton. But with the talent they have, with the development they have, I know they lost Aaron Feld, their strength and conditioning coach, but I imagine Miami's big enough to rebound from that. I love the picture that's painted here. I think Miami is going to be a undervalued team. I know that almost going to forget his name. He's on the Cover 3 podcast. There's Bud Elliott, Chip Patterson, Tom Fornelli, and then who's the other guy? Oh, Danny Cannell. Danny Cannell thinks that Miami is going to have a massive drop-off this year. Not quite Florida State bad, but probably as close as you could get from Miami. I'm probably much closer to the opposite end of the spectrum compared to him. I'm not quite on the opinion that some may have where, oh my gosh, Miami's going to win it all. They're a top 5 team. No. And some people probably think that, but I haven't heard many, if any, who say that. I think, though, that Miami is a team who's going to go over their win total of 8.5 in the preseason. And, oh my gosh. My bad for this. I forgot to change the conference odds and national title odds for the regular season. So just ignore those. But Miami is in second place for preseason ACC championship odds, and it's the same for preseason national championship odds. I know that. Forgot to edit it in. It's my bad, but also just know they're only behind Clemson. And Clemson's ahead in a somewhat decent margin in title odds, but in ACC championship odds, Miami's pretty close. Miami is viewed as Vegas as one of the better teams in America. I think their questions relate to overall, can they compensate for how much production's going out the window? Are they in a position to reload, if at all? And can Heatherman fix the defense, and how quickly can he do that? I love Carson Beck when he's healthy and when he's engaged. I love the depth at running back. Their O-line will be one of the best in America. I think their D-end group will be one of the best in America. D-tackle just has some questions for them. And then I like linebacker and corner. You just need 2 of the 3 corners who are currently projected to start to pan out, and this secondary will be much better. On top of that, they added in 40 new faces to this roster, and the average rank per composite commit for the 2025 class, including the transfers, was a 90.27. So top 15 class incoming on top of a class that for the 2024 cycle was top 5, with 25 4 stars this year, 14 3 stars. There's a lot to like about this roster. And looking through this schedule, you got Notre Dame in week 1 at home, Bethune-Cookman week 2, USF week 3, Florida week 4, a bye in week 5, Florida State on the road week 6, bye in week 7, Louisville week 8 at home, Stanford at home in week 9, SMU on the road in week 10, Syracuse and NC State back-to-back home games week 11 and 12, and back-to-back road trips late in the year at Virginia Tech and at Pittsburgh. Miami has some trap games. Like, I think Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech could be trap games. I think SMU and Louisville are losable games. I think that Florida and Notre Dame are losable games. But in all of those games, whether it's home field advantage, whether it's returning experience, whether it's roster talent, Miami, I think, should be favored in every one of their games. Should. Doesn't mean they'll win. But in every one of their games, I think they will be the better team, at least at the end of the year. That Florida game's tricky. I can see Florida starting out the year better, but finishing the year worse. For anyone else, given where they are at the schedule, I can't see that. So this is a team who should win 10 games, once again, in the regular season. And with Notre Dame on the schedule, 10-2 this year is going to be looked at in a much more favorable way by the playoff committee than 10-2 would have last year, because you have that Notre Dame game. And I think that this ACC schedule is tougher as well. This is a team where I think 10-2 is very possible. In fact, I would say it's likely. And that means a potential playoff berth, a shot at the ACC championship, and that should be Miami's goal this year. The expectation for this team, when I look at the roster and when I analyze it and observe it, is they should expect to reach the playoff. If Miami doesn't reach the playoff this year, the season is a surefire disappointment. Surefire. The only way the season is a success is if they make the playoff and then don't embarrass themselves in the playoff. Or maybe if they embarrass themselves in the playoff, they got to win the ACC and at least be the best in that conference. And that would be huge. Cristobal would be the first Miami coach to win the ACC, which is sad. It's wrong, actually, I would say. Miami's a much better program than many others in the ACC who've won the conference. That's my analysis overall of Miami, and thank you for tuning into that. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and also comment your thoughts on Miami Hurricanes football down below, and like the video to give us a boost in the algorithm. I think the most likely record for Miami is, I'm going to say about 11-1, 10-2. I could see 12-0, and I think 12-0 is more likely than 8-4. And then 9-3 is that weird limbo. I don't know if 9-3 is more likely than 12-0 or 12-0 more likely than 9-3. I'm pretty high on Miami this year. And I think especially as the year goes on, they're going to get better. And then there's the juxtaposition to where at the beginning of the year they have their toughest game. But Notre Dame also loses a lot. And Notre Dame has to travel south. And Notre Dame is starting a quarterback who's never taken a collegiate pass or snap before. And Miami is starting a veteran in Carson Beck, who I think looks to be healthy. So the schedule, it's tougher than last year's, but still plays to their advantage. And I think with Corey Heatherman and Shannon Dawson paired up, that's a great coordinator duo. I am very excited to watch Miami football this year, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. And I'll come out and say it right now, I think they're going to make the college football playoff. Now we can talk about Indiana. This is one I'm very excited to talk about. Very, very excited to talk about Indiana and what I think they can and will be this year. Before that, just got to look, see if there's a super chat in here. There is not, but we have 20 concurrent viewers, which is the most for today so far. I did start pretty early, and because I already released 3 videos today, people didn't get notifications. 8 likes. Let's try and get that up to 20 before we end off here. Thank you all for tuning in very much. Now let's talk about Indiana. I believe in Curt Cignetti. I believe in Curt Cignetti quite a bit. I think Indiana, boldly, has a wonderful shot. Has positive... Well, that's the wrong way of phrasing it. I think Indiana has a great chance to be better in 2025 than they were in 2024. Now, maybe I've already lost you there with the plot, where I think that a team that had their best season in program history is going to somehow improve after that, when they had a very easy schedule, when they had a winner at QB and had wonderful players on both sides of the ball, and many of whom, including Curtis Rourke, have left due to running out of eligibility, or like CJ West declaring for the NFL and getting drafted in the 4th round, which was pretty impressive. I thought CJ West was an amazing defensive tackle for Indiana last year. That Indiana defense was so damn good at the end of the year, and while the offense fell short in big games, it was impressive how just on time, quick, and efficient they were in really 11 of their 13 games, or at least 10 of their 13 games. That Michigan game was a game where the defense won. It was a close, needed win for Indiana, given their history against Michigan. So before we talk about why I think that is, I just want to ask you a few questions. Number 1, when do staffs typically have their biggest impact in college football? Is it right when they arrive on campus? Or is it, 2-3 years in, when they can make the players theirs, when they can really, put a print on them, when they can brand them, I guess is the best way I can say, when they can leave a mark on them and train them and mentor them. And also, when you have a roster that is well outside the top 25 in terms of talent, well outside the top 40, or at least the top 30. I think Indiana's around the 50s in terms of roster rankings when you look at the roster they've assembled through past recruiting classes. Where are you going to typically go when you get high-level transfers in the portal? Are you going to go up, or are you going to go down? I think you know the answer to those questions. Typically, a staff has their biggest impact a few years down the line, year 2, year 3. And then when you have as talentless relative to recruiting rankings and team ceiling as Indiana does, when you have that talentless of a roster, using the portal the way they have is typically going to upgrade the roster, not downgrade it. It's a huge part of the reason why they were successful last year. They brought in players with a winning mentality, winning culture, and players who were proven. And some players who weren't as proven, but were talented and were maybe highly recruited out of high school, but just didn't pan out. And, oh well, they went to Indiana. That's more so the case with this transfer portal class entering 2025 than Indiana's 2024 class. But my point remains. Cignetti inherited the epitome of nothing, the epitome of garbage, and brought it to 11-2, 8-1. They blew out all the teams with inferior, similar, or slightly better talent than they had. And the only teams they struggled against were top 15 talent rosters, and they're not even top 40. So I view the best coaching job in college football last year as Curt Cignetti's. And 11-2, 8-1, they returned 60% of their production. I think there's a great chance that they'll improve entering 2025. And before I get further into the weeds of that, I just ask that you would subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, watch all the way through, because it's going to be important for me to give you all the details and all my thoughts. And comment your thoughts below on Indiana. Do you think last year was a fluke? Or do you agree with me that they may actually improve? Or do you think that they'll regress, but last year wasn't a fluke at all, and they'll win 9 games or maybe even 10 games, or or at least 8 games, maybe a strong 8 games, and they compete in their big games against Oregon and Penn State. Let me know, and make sure to check out the description for anything else you can do, whether it's subscribing and hitting the bell to my podcasts, just playlists for my content, or supporting the channel monetarily. All right, let's do this. Indiana is a really fascinating case study entering 2025 because they lose a good amount of key players, but they return a lot of key players, and they add in key portal additions. Indiana returns 61% of its 2024 production, and they have an 80.1 PFF grade with their best tackle in Carter Smith, who has 830 snaps coming back, 79.5 pass blocking grade, 75.7 run blocking grade. Indiana also didn't run the football all that well last year. They were good in power running, like just getting the needed 2-3 yards per carry. But in terms of explosive runs, and part of that was on the running backs, but also on the offensive line, which was thin last year, they were not elite at running the ball. They were elite at stopping the run, though. They had the best run defense in college football, in my opinion, last year. They returned Elijah Surratt, who had 53 receptions, 957 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, averaged 18.1 yards per reception. Michael Kamara comes back, someone who definitely would have been selected in the NFL draft had he declared. 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and a pass defended with an 86.4 PFF grade. Could be the best D-end in football this year. I look at Aiden Fisher, All-American linebacker, coming back with 118 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 6 TFLs, 4 passes defended, and then D'Angelo Pons returns at corner. Small, yes, but he makes up for it with heart, brains, and just absolute effort. 83.5 PFF grade at corner, 9 passes defended, 3 picks, and a pick 6 against Washington. And you have more starters than just them who return, or at least more players who contributed who come back. So I look at Omar Cooper Jr. at wide receiver. I think he's a nice player. I think he's a good player. Could be a great player. I look at the 2 guards they bring back, Drew Evans and Bray Lynch, and also how they return Tyreek Tucker, who was in the defensive tackle rotation. Elijah Hardy was in the linebacker rotation. They bring back Amari Farrell. They have a lot of guys who were winning with the team last year, and some of whom were even with Cignetti at James Madison, Pons and Surratt. They bring a lot of them back, a lot of them. And that experience is valuable. And for those players to have an opportunity to continue to be developed and lead another group of Indiana football players is also valuable. They return a lot of veteran leadership, a lot of winners, and the only staff member they lost was Tino Sinceri. They retained every other member of their staff, even though many of them were enticed by higher level programs, big names, blue bloods, to leave. And Indiana was able to keep them. So they're bought in. The program's bought in. The staff's bought in. The players are bought in. And they bought players in the transfer portal too. I mean, think of Roman Hemby, who had 607 rushing yards last year, 6 touchdowns, did that behind the worst offensive line in college football, or one of the worst. Do you not think that other programs would have wanted him? Do you not think that? Because I think other programs wanted him, and Indiana just got him. What about Pat Coogan? 72.2 PFF grade, 813 snaps, a 79.1 pass blocking grade, and a 69 run blocking grade. Who wouldn't want Pat Coogan? There's a lot of teams who would have wanted Pat Coogan. I think Pat Coogan was even being entertained by Michigan to transfer there as center, and Indiana got him. Huge addition at center to replace Mike Caddick, who was a dog last year and unfortunately just didn't have any eligibility left. They bring in Fernando Mendoza, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year at QB, 3,004 passing yards, completed 68.7% of his throws, averaged 7.8 yards per attempt, which was the same as Carson Beck, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns and 105 rushing yards despite being sacked 40 times. Pretty crazy. I think Mendoza has more talent than Rourke. It's yet to be seen whether or not he'll be a better collegiate player, but I'm very high on Mendoza, especially in Mike Shanahan's system. And you look at Stephen Daly and Dominic Ratcliffe, some defensive linemen that Indiana got. They're also bringing in Jose Wheeler at defensive tackle And then you also have to pay attention to Kellen Wyatt, Maryland's best defensive end, who Indiana plucked and poached out of the portal. Daly had an 81 PFF grade, 4 sacks, a forced fumble, 3 passes defended, 9 TFLs. Ratcliffe had 4 TFLs, 2 sacks, and 22 total tackles, and an 82.5 PFF grade. Just really, really impressive stuff that Indiana did in the portal, what they did last year overall, and what they're bringing back. I love what Indiana has entering 2025. Love it. And I know they lost Curtis Rourke. I know they lost CJ West. And I'm very well aware that they lost Caddick, some offensive linemen, and those are players that are going to be hard to replace. But I know that they have staff continuity. It's one of the better staffs in America, given what they did with Indiana last year. People will say it's lightning in a bottle, and I'll just respond with this convenient note. You say lightning in a bottle. That's what you say. You genuinely believe Indiana was lightning in a bottle. That's what you think of them. Well, let me read this off to you. How is... I know it was against the 55th toughest schedule in America, so it wasn't that tough. But given Indiana's talent and the fact that out of all the teams they played, 12-game regular season schedule, every team they played in Big Ten Conference outside of Northwestern and Purdue were more talented than they were by recruiting rankings, and have had, even Purdue and Northwestern have had better recent success than Indiana has. And yet, against those opponents, all of them in the regular season plus Notre Dame in the playoffs, Indiana scored 41.3 points per game, which was second in scoring offense last year. And that's factoring out games against FCS opponents, I do believe, which they scored 77, and Western Illinois only scored 3. Indiana only allowed 15.6 points per game, which was 6th in scoring defense. It's absolutely bonkers what they were able to do even with that schedule. I mean, they were blowing out UCLA, who beat Nebraska, who did a pretty good job competing with Penn State on the road. They destroyed Nebraska in a way that Ohio State absolutely couldn't do, in a way that no one in the Big Ten would have done, outside of maybe Oregon. I don't even know if that. They beat Washington by double digits with a backup QB as Rourke was hurt. They scored 47 unanswered points against Michigan State on the road. And they lost to Ohio State, and Ohio State dominated them. But they held Ohio State to their second fewest total yards on the season, and they led them for a quarter and competed with them for a half. So I think what Indiana did last year was anything but a fluke when you look at how they beat their opponents and also how they lost their games. I mean, keep in mind, a lot of teams lost to Ohio State in a similar fashion to Indiana, if not worse. And it's the same thing with a lot of teams compared to Notre Dame that the Fighting Irish played. When I look at their schedule, it's an easier one relative to some of the tougher schedules in America yet again. It's much easier than Wisconsin's, for example. Indiana's to play Old Dominion week 1, Kennesaw State week 2, Indiana State week 3, Illinois week 4, Iowa week 5. They get a bye week 6, and then they play at Oregon week 7, host Michigan State week 8, host UCLA week 9. They play at Maryland and Penn State back-to-back in weeks 10 and 11. You then have Wisconsin at home week 12, a bye week 13, and then Purdue on the road in week 14. Their over-under win total preseason's 8.5. Their Big Ten odds are floating around plus 3,000, plus 4,000, really around that plus 3,500 mark. And their title odds, of course, are very small because a team that just has that low of a blue chip ratio has a infinitesimally smaller chance to win it all than even a team like Michigan, who, when you look at how Indiana and Michigan played last year, Indiana might be better than Michigan for the majority of the 2025 season, if not for the entire 2025 season. But those blue chip ratios and those higher ceiling players out of high school can especially matter when it gets to the postseason, for example. Indiana's only question mark, I think, is, do you believe in what the staff did last year or not? If you do, I think it's pretty clear that power rankings-wise, Indiana will get better. Now, since they play Oregon and Penn State on the road, they could, power rankings-wise, even be a whole touchdown better than they were last year and still lose those games and have a worse overall record. But that's the question. And do you believe in Cignetti and Mike Shanahan and Bryant Haynes? Do you believe in them or do you not? If you don't, then, well, they're not going to be better than they were last year, if you're right. And if you do believe in them and you're right, well, I'm telling you they should be just as good, if not better than they were last year, given what they return and given the fact that staffs usually have a big impact in year 2. I mean, think of Jim Knowles at Ohio State and the new defensive staff that Day hired along with them. Year 1 was a little bit rough. They had improvements, yes, compared to the prior year, but at the end of the year it fell apart. Year 2 in 2023 was when there was a massive improvement, and there was no drop-off throughout the year, even. Look at Nick Saban at Alabama. Gets there, has to clean up the mess. There are some improvements, but it's not all sunshines and rainbows. And then in year 2, well, they win the SEC West and are competing with Florida for a chance to go to the national championship game. And there are other countless examples too. So it's not always how it goes, and I could be wrong, but I love Mendoza at QB. I love Hemby and Kalon Black and Lee Beebe Jr. at running back. I think Surratt and Cooper Jr. at wide receiver is a great duo. On the interior O-line with Bray Lynch and Pat Coogan and also Drew Evans, I love that offensive line play right there. And then on the D-line, I think that entire D-line is a strength. I think they have 4 quality DNs, and I think 3 to 4 quality D tackles, maybe more than that, because I think the staff's wonderful at development. I love Pons at corner. I love Elijah Hardy and Aiden Fisher at linebacker. And they have NFL talent at a lot of positions. It's hidden, but it's there. They have an elite staff, a wonderful culture. Safety, depending on how those portal additions pan out, could also be a strength. I think their biggest concern is Zen Mahalski at right tackle. And Bob Bostad's a good enough O-line coach to where maybe he can make Mahalski average and not bad like he was at Ohio State. Tight end could also be a weakness too, but I think talent-wise, Holden Stays is better than who he's replacing. I look at their portal class, and it's an 86.52 average rank per composite commit, which is not good, but at the same time, the staff has worked with diamonds in the rough before and unlocked them, and it's a better portal class than what they had last season. I think that Omar Cooper Jr. will break out. I think that Tyreek Tucker will break out at D-tackle. There's going to be a lot of players who emerge and are better than what they were last season. And I'm completely sold on Indiana. I don't know if you are, but I encourage you to buy stock into Indiana and Curt Cignetti. I think as long as they can keep him, I don't think Indiana's going anywhere long term. Will they win it all ever? I'm not going to answer that. I mean, probably not, unless they show us and bring in consistent top 25, top 20 recruiting classes, which Cignetti's actually working on that right now. The recruiting is operating at a pretty good level for Indiana standards currently. Have 3 4-stars, and we'll probably get more for the 2026 recruiting class. Nonetheless, though, with a program like Indiana, you need to see it in order to believe it. But can they compete for maybe making an appearance in Indy? I think so. Can they compete for winning a playoff game at some point? I think so, given a field of 12 and soon to be 16 will include some weaker teams, especially relative to the top teams that Indiana can beat or even dominate, as not all 16 teams will have Ohio State level talent or Georgia, Alabama, even Notre Dame, Miami, Michigan level talent. Some of the participants will have much less than that. So I'm high on Indiana as a program. I'm even higher on them as a football team for 2025. I've said before, and Josh Pate actually clipped it for his bold prediction segment, I think Indiana's going to the playoff, and I think more likely than not, I believe they're going to win a game. So make sure before you leave, before we end off today, that you subscribe and like the video and comment how insane you think my view of Indiana football entering 2025 is down below. Alrighty. We now just have 2 more segments to go. Each will be about 10 minutes long, and then we'll get on out of here because I have places to be. Let's see what everyone is saying. Kels14 says, I have Indiana better than Miami. I agree with you. If you watched my top 10 segment yesterday, The clip to that will be out tomorrow. I'm very excited to have the college football world watch that. I also have Indiana ranked ahead of Miami, and I have Miami as a top 10 team, so consequentially I have Indiana inside of my top 10. Who has the better outlook? Does Penn State or Michigan have a chance to be the #1 program in the Big Ten in the next, let's say, 5 or 4 years, in the next whole recruiting cycle, where you bring in the 2025 recruiting class, and then after they leave, after the 2025 class, or much of it is gone from both Penn State and Michigan, will either of these teams have a chance to be viewed as the #1 program, the best program in the Big Ten? And if so, who has the better chance? That's what I'm asking here today. And before I give you my answer, please subscribe, hit the bell, and comment your thoughts on this question down below. Oregon and Ohio State are viewed unanimously almost as the top 2 Big Ten programs moving forward. Now, I think besides Michigan and Penn State, USC may have something to say about that. If Nebraska finds a way to improve their recruiting identity and Rule reveals himself to be this top 15, top 10 coach, I think they can contend for being one of the better programs in the Big Ten. Probably not quite #1 like USC, Penn State, and Michigan, but I think they can be close to that. So when I look at it, and I look at these two teams, Penn State obviously struggled to break through that glass ceiling of eliteness. They've been a great near-elite team, have struggled to be elite. Michigan has broken through the glass ceiling, but the regime who did it with Harbaugh, Minter, and Moore are gone. Or in the case of Moore, he's still at Michigan, but he's in a completely different position. He has to be the CEO and the big fish, the big cheese, rather than being just a part of the machine. So these teams right now are not the best in the Big Ten. I would not say they're top 2 in the Big Ten either. I actually agree with the consensus right now that it looks like it's going to be Ohio State and Oregon as the best programs in the Big Ten moving forward. At least I agree that that's the case right now, and there's a high chance it is that way moving forward. You should also know that I view Penn State as the #1 team in America for 2025. I think that Penn State's going to win it all this year. And I say that because out of the teams that reached the semifinal last year, they're the only team that's returning 60% of its production. They're the only team that's upgrading their coaching staff. Texas had an elite staff. They still do. They just pushed. They kept their staff practically the same in rankings. Penn State replaced Allen with Jim Knowles. That's a massive, massive upgrade. And Ohio State lost Knowles, replaced him with Patricia, which is a downgrade. I think Hartline's a downgrade from Kelly, at least in the short term. Long term, I think he has a high chance of being an upgrade. And then Notre Dame replace Al Golden with Chris Ash. I think that's a definite downgrade. So that, in addition to having possibly the #1 overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft with Drew Aller, and having a lot of seniors, a lot of All-Americans, whether from different magazines or grading services, like you look at Zane Durant, you look at Denai Dennis Sutton, you look at Luke Reynolds is viewed by many as a breakout player, Nicholas Singleton, Allen viewed as All-Americans, Ole Vega Ione and Nick Dawkins, interior offensive linemen, have that kind of respect. Same with A.J. Harris at corner, who's viewed as a way too early first-rounder in the 2026 NFL draft. Tony Roas clocked a 4.39 at linebacker. And Zakee Wheatley, I love Zakee Wheatley at safety. So Penn State having a national championship in their future, at least in my opinion, and actually in many persons' opinions, having a national title in their future, that certainly helps their odds against Michigan or against almost any other team in the Big Ten of having a shot to be the Big Ten's best program in the near and maybe even long-term future. But, and while Penn State has resources, and they do have donors, and they do have the whole, they have the whole Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, the whole DMV area to almost exclusively recruit. And then they have New Jersey as well, New York. Doesn't mean they'll get everyone, but they have a lot of that to themselves, and they do a really good job recruiting homegrown talent in Pennsylvania who produces good football. Michigan also has a good football recruiting base at home in their own state. Michigan has been able to go into Ohio at times and get some lower-ranked players who have high ceilings and develop them, like Rod Moore, and many think Jordan Marshall at running back. And Michigan traditionally has recruited better than Penn State. Doesn't mean they always will, but they brought in a much better recruiting class entering 2025. They have a quarterback in Bryce Underwood, who many view as more Cam Newton and more Vince Young than DJ Lagway, and DJ Lagway is viewed by many as a Cam Newton-level QB. And they upgraded their offensive coordinator. They upgraded their staff as well. They, out with Kirk Campbell, in with Chip Lindsey. And I think that Sherrone Moore, being a first-time head coach last year and making the amount of mistakes he did, likely means with how young he is that he is going to learn and improve entering 2025 and beyond. Wink Martindale learned some things and adapted to being more of a college defensive coordinator than an NFL one with Michigan last year. And yes, Michigan loses Mason Grant. They lose Kenneth Grant, lose Josiah Stewart. And while I don't quite think they will replace them in the way that Penn State will probably replace Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter, Penn State just has recruited much better at tight end, so it's much easier for them, I think, to replace Warren than it is for Michigan to replace Loveland. And Penn State doesn't lose as much on the D-line as Michigan does, so it'll be easier for them to reload there than Michigan. Rayshawn Benny graded out as high as Kenneth Grant last year, and I think he could be an All-American. And then you got Trey Pierce, Damon Payne Jr., Ike Awuna, and Trey Williams, who are all over 300 pounds, all of whom are juniors or older, all capable bodies, very talented guys. And Michigan returns Derek Moore, who could play himself into being a day 2 or even day 1 pick in the NFL. And then they return 4 senior linebackers in Jimmy Rolder, Ernest Hausman, Jashawn Barham. I believe the 4th is Jaden Hood. And Jair Hill graded out well per PFF and played well down the stretch. So these teams are very talented. They are. And in recent memory, Michigan has outdeveloped Ohio State in college and even in the NFL. They have, relative to how they recruit. And Penn State, some would argue even Penn State has in recent memory. Some would argue that. I'm not going to go quite that far, but I will listen to such an argument. I think Penn State right now has the best staff in America. Michigan's I don't think is close to that, but it's better than it was last year. Michigan certainly has the greater future at QB, and I think given their donors and their NIL engagement, I think Michigan right now has more resources than Penn State. All of these things combine to give me a picture of who I think is the best shot of being that potential number 1 program in the Big Ten. All of those things do. I think Michigan has resources. They have the overall quarterback edge. I think Underwood has a higher ceiling than Aller and will probably be viewed as a better collegiate player than Aller. I think that Michigan still has a edge to them overall in terms of reputation with recruits, so that helps as well. But I think that is withering away in a lot of different ways. I mean, some of that's there because I think they're more willing to pay high school guys than Penn State is. But Michigan's regime that won the title and that had 3 Big Ten championships and 3 playoff appearances in a row, they're gone. I mean, they're totally gone. And Penn State has the staff continuity advantage. They have a defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles, who's a better DC than even Jesse Minner. In my mind, they have an OC in Andy Kolnicki who's better than anyone Michigan's had at OC in quite a bit. And Chuck Losey, I think Chuck Losey might be the next Ben Herbert. Might. Like, is that top-tier alpha strength and conditioning coach. He's up there. And that combined with seniority and Penn State using the blueprint of Michigan and Ohio State. And on top of that, they've lost a lot of players before, and they reload. And they're an NFL factory too. And I look at it again, Michigan with resources, they still have they have a better reputation in terms of recency bias over the past, 4, 3, even really 2 years, because Michigan's title is still within reach, still within the rearview mirror. And then they also have a brighter future at QB, I think. But I will tell you, Penn State, as of last year, has developed better. They have coached better. They have superior coordinators and superior assistant coaches right now. They are more proven at head coach. They also I believe, have a better athletic director in Pat Kraft compared to Ward Manuel, which helps. And Penn State's schedule, they're unrivaled, as their name says. And not having to play Ohio State every year, not having to play anyone every year, and your schedule consistently rotates, and you're playing an easier non-conference schedule than Michigan is, and just the fact that, I'm going to be honest here and just come out and say it, just Jim Knowles being there and likely for a few years tells me that Penn State's probably going to be better than they ever have been under Franklin in that given stretch. Because Knowles is a genius. Look at what he did at Ohio State, what he did at Oklahoma State, what he did at Duke. And his defenses continue to get better and better and better. And this is the best situation he's ever walked into. And if they can retain Koldenicki, that's huge too. I think right now they have easily the best coordinator duo in America. So I'll go with Penn State. I think Penn State actually has much better odds than Michigan of being the Big Ten's best. Michigan still has odds, like more than 0% odds to be the best in the Big Ten, though. With Underwood, with the buy-in they have, the resources, the fact that Moore and much of that staff is very young, and they have some good coaches, some great coaches like Lou Esposito, for example. It's possible, but right now I would give the edge to Penn State as the team in the Big Ten that has the best chance to overthrow Oregon and Ohio State. Michigan has a chance too, but it's not nearly the same as Penn State's. I think Penn State's going to field an elite team this year, one of the best teams of the 2020s, better than some of the previous national champions that have come before them, assuming that Penn State follows through on my prediction and wins it all in the style that I think they will. And if they can keep Knowles and Koldenicki, and with the way they've been developing and recruiting, I imagine while they're not going to be a national title contender talent-wise in the way that Oregon and Ohio State will, they may outdevelop them to a point that they'll be in that same conversation. And even if they aren't, this is going to be a team that wins about 11, 10 games every year, and in many years is competing for that trophy in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, comment your thoughts down below, and hit the bell. I'll see you in the next video segment. And last but not least, I want to talk about Steve Sarkisian and what he has built at Texas. That's what I want to talk about, and then we will get out of here. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Just stay through this final segment. It'll be fun. All right. Steve Sarkisian is the best roster constructor in all of college football. And today, I'm going to tell you why. Sarkisian has built up Texas through elite recruiting. When you look at his recruiting classes at Texas, the 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 recruiting classes, they are ranked 5th, 3rd, 6th, and 1st. That's their rank. That is an average rank of just under 4th nationally. That is, I believe, just do some quick math here in my head. That is a 3.67 is their average rank over his past 4 classes. That's crazy. That right there is just genuinely crazy right there. The fact that his classes have been ranked that high in such a short time. And very quickly, his classes leveled up from what Texas had under Tom Herman. They're recruiting the line of scrimmage at an elite level, offensively and defensively. No one can pay more than Texas. No one can. They have the resources. They have the best athletic director in the country in Chris Del Conte, who continues to win the Director's Cup year over year over year. And Sark has learned from his previous coaching and coordinator endeavors and jobs. And while I still think game management is at times a question for Texas under Sark, and I think that they still have some ground to make up. I don't think they are where Sark wants them to be just quite yet, although they are so close. Maybe a year away, or maybe this is the year they arrive with Manning and all they return on defense, even though they also lose a lot to the draft. It's so impressive to see what Sark has built. I truly think he's the best roster constructor, and I will say that the reason I believe that is they don't have the weakness of Georgia, for example, where Georgia has just not been able to evaluate wide receivers. They haven't been able to develop them. And at quarterback, for example, they've had some ups and downs. I mean, you remember Stetson Bennett, of course, and Carson Beck in 23. But what about Carson Beck in 24? What about Bennett in 20? And what about Jake Fromm before him? What about them? I mean, the average Georgia quarterback has probably played under Smart at a similar level to the average quarterback under Sark. And Sark is well behind in tenure compared to Kirby. And Arch Manning is a better prospect than anyone who's come through Georgia's doors under Smart at quarterback. Maybe besides Justin Fields, who transferred out, went to Ohio State. You know the whole story. Speaking of Ohio State, when has Texas ever looked as bad as Ohio State has on the O-line in 23 and 24 at different times? Never, because they actually recruit the position, unlike Justin Fry, and their development isn't as spotty. They are better at playing as a cohesive unit on the O-line, Texas is, than almost anyone else in the country, even a top program like Ohio State in recent memory. And unlike Oregon, who's had to go to the portal to really reload in the O-line for last year and for 2025, Texas has just said, no thank you, we believe in our development, and we've proven it on the field. And then you look at Alabama. Alabama went 9-3 and had some pretty horrific QB play and a lot of questions on defense, despite inheriting a lot of good defensive talent. Sark every year has upgraded Texas's defense, practically, with this past season being his best by a mile at Texas, and actually per ESPN's FPI, it was the best defense in college football, which I think Ohio State's was better, but I also will agree that Ohio State's defense had some cornerbacks who were suspect and inconsistent, and Texas did not have a unit that was as inconsistent and weak at times as the Ohio State cornerback room. Great cornerback room. It's just Texas was near elite to elite at everything on defense. Ohio State was at every position outside of cornerback, where they were just great, which is still awesome. And all of that is not to insult Georgia or Oregon or Ohio State, maybe a little bit to Alabama, because the fact they didn't reach the playoff is just horrifically disappointing. But it's a compliment to Texas and how Steve Sarkisian has constructed his team and roster. And he's also developed at a high level, too. I mean, take a look at this. Players drafted under Steve Sarkisian. No one was drafted in the 2022 draft after the 5-7 2021 campaign, which makes sense. There were improvements, there were bright spots that year, but a lot of double-digit blown leads because the culture was changing, the team was changing. It was a rough year one. In fact, that year, I will tell you, after that season, I kind of regrettably sold a lot of my stock in Steve Sarkisian. Although, following year, I predicted him to improve, and they did. And the year after that, I picked him to win the Big 12, which they did. Missed them reaching the playoffs, though. And then last year, I thought that they would lose 3 games. That was very incorrect of me, although I thought the schedule would be tougher than it was. 3 regular season games, not 3 games overall. Still thought they'd be top 10 in power ratings, though, and they were. So you look at first-round picks over the previous 3 NFL drafts where Texas players have been selected because they weren't selected in the first draft where Sark was the head coach. 6 first-rounders, an average of 2 per year. And then you look at 7 second and third rounders, and 15 fourth, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounders. That's a lot. That is quite a bit. That is just over 9 players drafted on average in all of Sark's years at Texas outside of his first year, which was a total, we're blowing everything up. We're hitting the fuse and the dynamite's going to explode. We're rebuilding this thing from the ground up. I just cannot express enough how I think Sarkisian is right now the best roster constructor in all of football. Best head coach? I don't think so. I think that Smart is way better at game management. I think last year showed that even when Texas had the clearly better team. I think Day is better at game management. You saw that in the Cotton Bowl. You also saw that with how Texas and Ohio State both finished with 2 losses despite Ohio State playing the much tougher schedule. And then I think Lanning is a better game manager than Sark. And you saw that with how, look, Lanning beat 2 FPI top 10 teams last year. He won some close games. He punched above his weight class. He did not have the talent Texas did, and yet he won big games, and he beat the national champion. And Sark did not, and Sark's a year ahead of Lanning. He also inherited, to be fair, a much worse situation than Lanning did. But regardless, still a year ahead, still has more talent to work with, had a better team last year, still had 2 more losses with what I would argue was a similar schedule in the regular season, definitely an easier schedule. But regardless of that, that's game management. When I look at recruiting, when I look at development, when I look at piecing a roster together and piecing it together properly, which means you're recruiting everywhere and not neglecting a certain position, Sark's number 1. I mean, what position have they neglected? What have they neglected? I can't name one. I can name one for Georgia, wide receivers, maybe even QB, depending on how Stockton pans out this year. I can name one for Ohio State, O-line. Even though they're fixing that right now with Bowen, they've neglected it as recently as January of 2025. And then, I mean, with how Larry Johnson's been recruiting recently on the D-line, they might be neglecting that as well. And then you look at Oregon. Oregon has had some... Honestly, I was shocked their blue chip ratio on the O-line was only 50%. That shocked me. And I don't know if their wide receivers have exactly panned out in previous classes. And their secondary classes certainly didn't. That's why they had to have all those transfers last year. So Sark is the best of the best when it comes to constructing a roster. He's the best roster builder. And every season at Texas, under Sark, the Longhorns have improved. I don't know if that will quite be the case this year, because at some point you get to a point as a team and a program where you're kind of trying to tread water and occasionally go up, but you'll have some years where you have to regress just because it's hard to feel the goat. It's hard to improve every year when you eventually become a top 5 team and even top 3, top 2 team. And Texas is approaching that very quickly. But I would be inclined to say they're at least going to tread water and be a similar team to what they were last year. And who knows? Maybe they can be better. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that with Oregon. I'm not saying that with Ohio State. I'm not saying it with Notre Dame, certainly not. Alabama may, but Alabama also was not a top 5 team last year. And I might say it with Georgia because Georgia wasn't top 5 last year either, and a lot went wrong for them. But Texas, out of all the teams that many would consider top 4, top 5 in power ratings, that's the only one I think is going to stay the same or get better, at least from the FPI power ratings. I think that Oregon and Ohio State and some considered Ole Miss top 4 in power ratings, and Notre Dame for sure, those teams have some things to work with and some issues with all they lost and what they bring back. I don't think Texas quite has that. And then as for Penn State, well, they return more than all those teams, including Texas. So that's a different conversation, a different team, a different video. But Sarkisian, I think, clearly is the best roster builder in college football. Heck, I would say last year showed that. I mean, think of how many games that they almost tried to lose and couldn't because they were that talented. And then think about how they played Ohio State. How Ohio State was on fire against Oregon and Tennessee, and for 2.5 quarters against Notre Dame, and then was never consistent and only put together 2 consistent drives against Texas. Think about that. And that Ohio State team was insane in the postseason. Just don't kid yourself. Don't try and put on a different pair of glasses with a shade that is biased against Texas. I know that Texas has had a lot of moments where they say, oh, well, we're going to be back soon. And then they try to kick down the door and they, completely snap and hyperextend their leg. That's not what's happening here. Texas is back. Texas won the Big 12 their final year in the conference. They've made the playoff 2 years in a row. They competed with Ohio State, brought them down to the wire. They competed with Georgia in the SEC championship game, brought them down to the wire. And those are the top 2 programs in America right now. And they just signed the number 1 recruiting class and put a school record number of NFL players into the draft. So that's all I have to say here. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. Do those things. I very much appreciate it. All right, that's all I'm going to say for this video, guys, for this live show. Remember to like if you haven't already. I've probably mentioned that so many times, though, that you guys know. I'll see you very soon. And these clips will be out in the following days. And I'm actually uploading on Spotify and Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts now. Not putting the clips up there, but anything that's not live or my hour and a half, 2 hour long live shows, those are up on those platforms. So check them out if you want to. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.